Howdy folks, so I apologize in advance. This is going to be a straight through video without a whole bunch of editing. Uh, and we're going to be tackling a moss farm today because I just got two working prototypes. One is a lot better than the other, and this was my first one that actually worked. The problem with this one is that it just doesn't produce enough bone meal to be sustainable. In other words, it just about breaks even as far as the amount of bone meal it makes. We're using obviously moss and azalea bushes and all the things that you get from a moss farm to create the bone meal. So it would be no good if it just breaks even, because the farm would just sit here and run into perpetuity and you'd never realize any profits from it. So the point is that you should be able to either get one of the moss products or bone meal from the farm. That's the point of the farm. Alright, so that one worked. Not very well, but it in fact works. But it got the concepts down of I needed to have a timer. So in this case, we're using an etho clock that accomplishes two things over here. So as the redstone wire comes down, it goes to this observer. This observer is then powering the dispenser with the bone meal in it. And off of that, ignore this stuff here. This was left over from another part of the farm that no longer works. Actually, maybe I needed to double fire it? No, I don't think so. So this observer here then goes up to this water washer. So we have this dispenser here, which has a bucket of water in it, which then washes the farm and all the items. It breaks all the moss blocks and all of the azalea bushes and washes it down into these hoppers. And it's very important that I have these buttons there so that this way the water actually goes over everything on this farm. If you didn't have those buttons there, it would just basically make a beeline for this, and it would ignore these blocks over here, and they never get broken. So, and then each time we also need to break what's on top of our seed block. So this is our seed block of moss here, so that when we bone meal that, it starts converting this stone into moss. And we need to break whatever bush grows on top of it. Otherwise, it won't accept any more bone meal. It won't try to spread any more moss. All right, so let's go over to the one that works quite well. It's over this way. So props to Chaos, one of the members of the Bedrock or Bust server, who showed me the layout of where the lava should be. So the lava is making the stone blocks themselves. So they've all converted this to moss on this one, but inside of here we have waterlogged pistons right in here. You can see there's the water. I don't think we've destroyed anything, hopefully not. I raised it up so that hopefully that wouldn't happen. And then we've got obsidian backing up all of the pistons. In fact, the entire farm is ringed in obsidian with the exception of where the stone comes through. This is so that when the pistons are pushing the stone across, it doesn't then push the other side of the farm out. All right, so we've got 4 chambers. This one's covered up with this clock and these things up top, but 4 chambers of stone makers, and then 2 pistons on each one pushing the stone forward. And then we're going to be converting that stone into the moss that you see here. All right, so the other thing is that this moss will break whenever it's pushed against by the stone. So you don't have to have like separate breakers for the moss blocks. That'll all be done by the stone maker, the stone generators pushing everything forward. Now you will get all of the azalea bushes and tall grass and that sort of thing on top of this. And I initially had what was that? I don't know. I had dispensers at the corners, but I instead went with these pistons that raise up with water behind it, because what was happening was if you had a piece of moss here at the corner, like moss carpet, the dispenser would waterlog that and it wouldn't break it. And when it was waterlogged, it essentially ruined the farm because 4 of the blocks were not being harvested. So it would kind of work, but it was much better if it would break those corner moss carpets or azalea bushes or whatever, those weird things that can be waterlogged. So this center block never gets pushed by the stone generators because they go around it. So this is our seed block. This is the one that we need to bone meal. And I said, well, okay. Now one thing, you can't bone meal it from the top. Like if your dispenser is pointed down, any block that's underneath of, like any moss block that's underneath of a solid block doesn't then convert over to moss. It's just weird like that. So we have down below our dispenser, which is, right now it's covered up because I needed a way to get bone meal into it. So I simply put a sticky piston here, and there is our dispenser right inside there. So then when I shut this, it completes this circuit. All right, so let's look at the wiring on this thing and see how it kind of works. So up top we have an etho clock. And I have it loaded with 5 plus 2, so 7 items. And then running off of that, on quite a bit of delay, is our border blades. And that shouldn't be there. Anyway, going down this way and this way and this way, so there's 4 of them, and they're all controlled by this redstone line. And there's a delay because I need the water to go all the way to the center, not just flash, right? Because if you just flash it, like you just pull that piston up for a split second, the water doesn't have enough time to get to the center. And the items would just get stuck kind of levitating around in here. And the other thing is that I needed on the other side of this etho clock to carry that signal down to the dispenser to get the center block bone mealed. So here we have that coming out to just this repeater on top of the observers. The observer chains run down next to the water there and flash that, which goes into that dispenser, which is above that solid block. And then I thought about the collection, and initially I was going to have like the collection go off the edges somehow and like have a hole knocked in this so that the water would flow over to hoppers. And I said, well, wait, why don't I just do it through the center? So I put a hopper minecart on top of this little hopper chain here, and when everything gets washed into that center block, this hopper minecart picks it up and deposits it here. So let's watch this thing run. There's 2 switches. All right, yeah, that was the other part of the redstone that you need to know about. The pistons need to be on a clock that pushes, but it cannot be too fast of a clock, because if it is too fast, what will happen is, I don't know why the game glitches out and you wind up getting cobblestone instead of stone. And cobblestone's no good because it won't convert over to moss, and it essentially breaks the farm. So we've got this little clock here. It's just a repeater going into a solid block with a redstone torch on the side, which gets to clocking and is controllable as far as its speed goes because you can adjust this repeater. And you have to. It has to be 3 or 4, otherwise you start getting cobblestone on 1 tick or 2 ticks. So here we go. These guys are now flashing. They're trying to push their way inward with stone, and you see that worked. Now the other part of it is up here. We're going to go ahead and turn this on. That unlocks that clock, and then you can start seeing how this works. So the center gets bone meal, it spreads the moss up here, the pistons raise the block, the water flows in, it flows towards the center. All these items get picked up by the minecart. Alright, so there you go. Now, I think it would be possible to perhaps hook a composter up to a dropper that then would feed up to the dispenser to make it infinite, but hand loading it really is not that big a deal. Especially, it'll hold 9 stacks. That'll produce more than the double chest full of moss and all the various moss items. Also, down below the moss chamber, I added a solid floor to make sure that items couldn't pop through. If you're really observant, you're going to see items popping through, but they're not. It's just a visual glitch. So hopefully that makes some sense to you guys. And the 2 circuits are the etho clock and the piston pushers. Of course, the etho clock does the water gates, and it also controls the bone mealing of the seed block. And then one more thing I forgot here was for the stone generators themselves, the lava, I've had to raise this up by 2 blocks. So back behind this obsidian is the pistons, the waterlogged pistons. 2 blocks up to the lava source so that it flows down 2 before it contacts the front of the piston and turns into stone. If I didn't do that, I was getting cobblestone for whatever reason, and I already said that breaks the farm. So I've also scooted this whole thing back by 1 block because you couldn't have any blocks over top of what you're trying to make moss out of, because if there were solid blocks there, they wouldn't convert to moss. So they are scooted back just by 1 block. So this farm does produce much more moss than it would take to make the bone meal to keep the farm running. So you could probably pull about half of its product off to use elsewhere, like if you wanted azalea bushes or moss blocks or moss carpets, and still have plenty enough bone meal to keep the farm running. That's just what it's produced in just a few minutes while I was building it. So if I ran it for any amount of time, I'm sure that double chest would not be enough. You'd have to create quite a storage system. Guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully this all makes some sense to you. And I think the one thing I could do is clean up the redstone wiring just quite a bit. But as it is, it's a prototype. It works, and it works quite well. Have a good day.